Bang, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Abhishek Rastogi, partner Khaitan and Company, advocate Supreme Courts and various high courts joining in. Welcome to the show, Abhishek, and always a pleasure to speak to you, especially on such a day where we've actually completed 5 years of GST. And plus, we had the 47th GST meeting as well 2 days ago. So a lot of things to talk about.
Thanks a lot. It's always my pleasure.
Absolutely. So Abhishek, let's start off with in terms of, in 5 years of GST that have been completed now, what do you make of it? How have you seen that entire ride over the last 5 years?
I think to be very fair to the government, it was not an easy task. With the diversity which we have, the rate structures which we have today, it was a necessity to have different rates, and it was not easy to get all the states on board. So I think full credit must go to the Indian government, because they ensured that the robust tax system, a transparent tax system, and the much needed system is there today for our better tomorrow. So it is not easy, when there is so much of diversity, but the government has done a lot of these things with innovative mind. For instance, if you see the IGST model, the global economies are today looking at India, that how we have implemented that, how place of provision for services is happening in India, and so on and so forth. So I think overall it's a creditable thing. A lot of hard work has gone into it, and I think that credit must not be taken away.
Right. So overall, what would be the things that have actually made this regime a positive one?
So I think a lot of these things. So for instance, if you see the tax leakages on the input credit side, now there is a mismatch concept, or the concept wherein, few people are not paying, or there are cases of fake invoices. I'm not going to the situation where even genuine taxpayers may get some hardship due to these initiatives. But yes, for a lot of fake invoicing things and a lot of other things, that tracking happens. Today, the government is in a position to use the system and to use artificial intelligence to track a lot of these fake transactions, a lot of these tax evasion situations, and so on and so forth. So I think today we have a robust technology. We have the usage of artificial intelligence. That is happening in a big way. And, when these investigations happen, the government has a lot of data with it. And when this data is then given to the taxpayer, there are fair chances that there will be recoveries with respect to that information. So that is very handful and useful.
Right. So taking these positives into consideration, let's talk about the negative side of it as well. What have been the key aspects that have actually led to a disappointment amongst the public?
See, I think rather than saying it as negative, I would want to say that, what needs to be done to be fair to this government. There are a few things such as anti-profiteering provisions. So I think today the country, the industry needs methodology to determine the quantum of profiteering. This is a big issue which is going in Delhi High Court, and I am arguing for a dozen of such petitioners. It is important today to have certainty of tax. So I think businesses would want to transfer this benefit to the ultimate consumer, but how to determine the quantum of profiteering? And then there's a challenge to that computation, which is, I think, bothersome. So possibly, with 5 years of GST now, we must have that methodology to determine the quantum of profiteering. Second, very important is that there is a lot of burden now which is coming on high courts, because there is no tribunal, GST tribunal, which has been formed. But what I understand is that there is a high-level discussion which is going on. Even the 47th GST Council meeting, there was a discussion on it, and soon we will have GST tribunals. So I think litigation gets settled at the tribunal stage, because tribunal, we understand, is the final fact-finding authority. So all facts get noted and discussed and debated and argued there. That's important. So I think formation of these GST tribunals will help industry, will help in closing of this litigation without the taxpayers going to the court in absence of these tribunals.
Right. So, with all of this said and done, Abhishek, how far, according to you, has it lived to the promise of, say, a simple tax regime?
See, I think a difficult question. It's not that simple. But the comparable is what? The comparable must be the erstwhile regime. Now, if we talk about the simple tax or GST being a simple tax, we need to understand that the erstwhile regime, the taxpayer was supposed to file the VAT return, the service tax return, the excise return, apart from all customs compliances, which remain as it is. Under the GST regime, at least now, there are simplified versions of returns in the sense that you have to file just one GST return, but of course, for a separate registration, which was also the case under the VAT regime. So I think in terms of the compliance burden, the burden has certainly come down. So the number of returns have come down. Of course, because this is a new tax, there are a lot of interpretational issues. And whenever anything new comes, it requires more understanding of the statutory provisions, deep dive into those interpretational issues, and so on and so forth. And few places there will be constitutional gaps, and the matters would go to the court. So all of those things were bound to happen. But I think in these 5 years, the GST Council has moved very proactively on various such issues, wherein, in fact, we have taken so many of these issues to the court, and GST Council has addressed these issues before the matter is decided by the court. So I think, keeping that in mind, certainly the credit must go to the GST Council.
Right. And overall, with all of this said and done, the 5-year milestone is crucial because clearly it marks the end of guaranteed revenues to states from the center. So what would it mean for the state according to you? And do you think an extension period by the state is something that will be demanded?
So my take is like this, and this is completely personal. If there is no extension by the central government, it is not an aberration at all, because for 5 years, the compounded annual growth rate at 14% was determined. It has been compensated for a period of 5 years. Now, in a situation where there was COVID and assume that there was no GST, the state revenues would have fallen. The central government, on the other side, even in this situation of COVID, did not say that the force majeure would apply, or we would not give you the compounded annual growth rate at 14%, which we determined. So I think 5 years is a fair period. It has been given at a compounded annual growth rate of 14%, including the COVID period. So I think it is fair to say that the central government supported the states wherever there was loss of compensation. The compensation cess, if it gets extended now, would lead to additional burden on certain sectors. You know for a fact that it is not only pan masala, gutka, etc., or the cars. It is also aerated waters, aerated water, lemonade, and a lot of other things also which get subjected to this compensation cess, which leads to a burden on the ultimate consumer. So I think that compensation cess, which was levied for 5 years, must now end with no additional burden on few of these identified sectors. And that would be the fair and pragmatic way.
Right. So according to you, what lies ahead for this regime from here on, according to you? What are the key things we should be watching out for?
So I think, of course, there are a lot of constitutional challenges on various issues. We need to see that how courts interfere, how much they interfere, what are the findings, and what GST Council as a proactive measure gets onto the table to provide the relevant benefit to industry. I think that will be closely watched. There are a few critical aspects such as anti-profiteering, which are there in court, a place of supply for intermediary services, a lot of these export benefits which are there, which are now being tested before courts. Block credits, we understand that for these block credits, the government is coming out with circulars to ensure that the blockage of credit, there is more certainty. What happens in case of these fake invoices or credits or vendors running away? What happens to bad debts? These are the issues which need to be addressed, because if a person has paid money, then, and if there is a bad debt, then will that person get the credit back or will get the refund back? These are some sensitive issues, because You cannot ask a supplier to be out of pocket when he has not received the consideration and the transaction is treated as bad debt. So I think we need more certainty on these issues. India has done quite well to address a lot of such issues, and even the global economies today are looking down and looking up to us and examining and observing how closely India has implemented these schemes. So I think it's a good thing for us, even at the global platform, to showcase our capabilities and the innovative thinking. So I think going forward in the next 5 years, I feel that the focus of the government will be and must be on rate rationalization. Today, we cannot have multiple number of rates. These rates have to come down to a lesser number of different rates. There must be more tax certainty with respect to a lot of these issues which are today ambiguous or are before courts or which need clarification. The government must come out with strict guidelines when there are coercive recoveries against the taxpayers, because that's not what is provided in the Act, but what happens on the ground is certainly different. The government has already come up with an instruction to address that issue, but I think the real implementation will be when some strict actions are taken in case of genuine cases where taxpayer is not at a problem. So I'm expecting those things to happen in the next 5 years.
Right. So is it right to say that we could see a unified tax regime with a single tax in the next 5 years? Or do you think it could be slightly earlier than that as well?
No, I doubt India will have a single tax regime. We will certainly have multiple rates, but what I feel is that 12 and 18% will merge at some point of time. So I think going forward, we may have exempt 8, 18 and 28 is what I feel.
Okay. And overall, we did also have the 47th meeting of the GST Council. What were the key takeaways according to you, apart from the rates, where inclusions and exclusions that have happened? But on a broader end, initially, what are the key takeaways?
So I think I was surprised to see the tax rate increase on cut and polished diamonds from 0.25% to 1.5%. That is basically 6 times of the existing tax rate. I feel that is a little too high. Then renting of residential dwellings to business entities. So if you give a guest house for residential purposes, there are clarification that these will be taxable. This is a good clarification. To my surprise, hotels with a room rate tariff of less than 1,000 rupees, they've become taxable at 12%. Slightly higher rate for the low cost hotel accommodation. It could have been at 5% to begin with. Then to my surprise, which I was not expecting, was hospitals to be taxed at 5%, wherein the room rent is more than 5,000. I think that will lead to some burden. That I think must be now again discussed and debated, because it will lead to unnecessary burden on health-related services. And I think that's not the endeavor of this government. So possibly with or without limit, any tax on this hospital room is not a good sign. There are a lot of good clarification with respect to electric vehicles. With or without battery, everything gets taxed at 5%. There was confusion in industry. So I think that's a very, very welcome clarification. For e-commerce, small players, there is a composition scheme which has been announced. It will help a lot of e-commerce players who are of small size, because now they will get the benefit of that composition scheme, and so on and so forth. One of the most interesting one was, of course, the gambling and betting. And I think the report on online gaming, gambling and betting has been deferred by 15 more days. That will be an interesting subject in itself, because the Indian gaming industry is booming at this stage. And I think it will be fair to the online gaming industry to be taxed at such a rate so that these players are not forced to move out of India. And the Indian consumer should not find the online gaming platforms of other countries to be more lucrative. So that must not happen. I think the policy must come in such a way so that the Indian online gaming industry gets the benefit, they get an edge over the foreign players, so that the industry booms in the country.
Absolutely. And that's something which we should be discussing, Abhishek, soon next week as well, to actually understand as to what is it, that the government is planning for the online gaming industry. Secondly, what the implication could be, and what is the best way to take that conversation forward between the industry players to help that industry grow in the country. So that's a conversation we should be picking up next week, and everyone should be watching out for that as well. But simultaneously, on the 47 GST Council meeting, the other thing is a lot of ease in terms of GST compliance for business is something that was spoken about as well. If you could just highlight a couple of points that will be beneficial for a common man.
See, I think the endeavor of the government is very clear. They want the taxes to be paid on time. And for that to happen, the ease in compliance has to happen. Also understand that today, globally, there are rankings of ease of doing business in India. And there are a lot of different parameters, how much time you take to file return. And, I've myself gone through details of such rankings and how these rankings are determined. These are all time-based, and how sensitive the data will remain, how critical is the system easy to understand, and so on and so forth. So all that results in the ease of doing business in India. Over the period of time, India has been improving in its ranking in terms of ease of doing business, be it, time which you require to obtain registration, time which you require to comply with these tax provisions, the compliances, tax payments, refunds, and so on and so forth. So if we compare today, what has happened in last 7-8 years is significant in terms of both the pre-GST regime and the GST regime. These compliances have become easier over the period of time. Now, of course, under the GST regime, everything gets consolidated. The number of returns get ultimately reduced. But the endeavor of the government will remain to further simplify, will remain to give a lot of data from the system. So there'll be a lot of data which will pop up from the system, so that you know for a fact that this is the data. So for instance, if we today comply with the income tax return, you have Form 26AS, which gives you all the details of the tax paid on your behalf. So you have all the TDS details. Now, what will happen is a lot of this auto-populated data will come even for the indirect tax returns, so that there is more accuracy. There are lesser chances of errors. There'll be lesser chances of today people faking or doing some tax evasions, because the system will generate that data. And all of this will significantly help to reduce time of compliances. So from that perspective, the compliances will become easy, because there will be a lot of automation which will happen. At the same time, the government will be able to track the leakages, because it has a lot of this data. So any wrong credit which comes into your return can be actually seen immediately from the auto-generated data from the system. So I think both from the perspective of tax evasion, it helps the government. The taxpayers get the advantage from the auto-populated data, and there is an overall ease in the system as far as these compliances are concerned, as far as these payments are concerned. Most of these things today which are happening are online. So even if you have to file a return, appeal, refund, etc., is all online. So the interaction with the tax authorities have reduced, and that interaction, when it gets reduced, leads to different repercussions which are very, very positive. So I think that has happened. The implementation of the system, the GST network, automation, auto generation of data are all steps towards better compliances and ease of doing business in India.
Absolutely. So I think overall it's an interesting time, even for the government, even for the layman, because from here on we will see a lot of stabilization that will happen, a lot of learnings that the government, they themselves would have taken in the last 5 years, is where they will be able to correct, probably take learnings out of the failures and improvise on that aspect as well for the common man. So I think a good time in the offing on the taxation front for the country. And I think the next conversation that we should be having is what is the fate of these newly budding online gaming industry, and what the GST Council has in store, whether they will be killing the industry or will they let it grow. I think that's the conversation, Abhishek, we should be having next.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Abhishek. Always a pleasure to get your views and insights. Speak to you soon again, and stay safe.
Thanks.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.